Hey there, it's Dave with House Flipping Spreadsheet, and this is a quick case study on how you can use the Rehab Analyzer tool to help you analyze a project. So I've got an example project up here that I'm going to pull up for you and just kind of walk through all the different tools and features that you can use to help you analyze the maximum purchase price that you should offer for a property. So I've got a property here that I've basically been doing some research on. It's kind of in the market that I invest in, and it's quite a bit below the values of comparable properties in the area. So it's at about 110,000. I know based upon working in this area that the properties that are about 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, around the same size of this property are generally going for about 185 to $200,000. So I think this one's at least worth putting together a quick analysis just to see where we're going to be for this property to see if we should make an offer. So the tool we're looking at here is the Rehab Analyzer tool, and this is included in the House Flipping Spreadsheet Lite version, but it's also included in our Basic Pro and Enterprise version as well. And this is just the overall dashboard that you can use to analyze the maximum purchase price that you should offer for a property. So first, the first step of analyzing a deal is inputting the after repair value. So based upon your knowledge of the market, based upon a comparable sales analysis, reviewing the comparable sales in the area, you need to come up with an after repair value. So that after repair value is what you think you can resell the property for after you've done the repairs to the property. So again, I said that it was going to be around 185 to $200,000. I'm just going to be a little bit conservative here and plug in 185 for our after repair value. The next step is going to be to set up our buying costs. So your buying costs are your costs that you pay when you actually purchase the property. So that's going to be maybe an appraisal fee, an inspection cost. So a lot of times if you are going to be hiring out a professional inspector to inspect the property, you'll pay an inspection fee to that inspector to inspect the property. Title insurance, title work, so that can be about $500 or so. So generally speaking, your buying costs are going to be about 1 to 2% of your purchase price. So our purchase price, we're probably going to end up purchasing around $100,000 or so, and we're at about $1,400. So we're at about 1.5% of our purchase price. So that seems about right. The next step is going to be our holding costs. So these are the costs that you're going to incur when you're holding the property. So your property taxes, your insurance, your utilities, and then maintenance of the property. So the first step of setting up your holding costs is to think about the schedule. So how long you think it's going to take to actually rehab the property, and then how long it's going to take to actually sell the property. So generally speaking, a property of this size, which is probably going to end up being, for the most part, a complete gut, new kitchens, new bathrooms, new finishes throughout. I would say this would take about 1.5 to 2 months, but it could probably be done faster than that. But I'm just going to plug in 2 months for the rehab schedule. The listing period is the amount of time that it's going to take to sell the property. So once you get it listed, how long is it going to take for you to get an offer on the property and then actually hand over the keys to the end buyer? So generally it might take about, in a seller's market like it is today, you're going to, if you do a good job, you're going to probably be able to sell it in the first couple weeks. So I'm going to assume about 2 weeks to sell the property, and then it's going to take about 30 to 60 days to close on the property. So to process all the paperwork, get all the financing in order for the buyer, that generally takes about 30 to 45 days. So I'm going to assume that we're going to have about 2 months of listing period schedule. So overall, our total holding period is going to be about 4 months for this property. So once you plug that in, that's when you can start plugging in your monthly holding costs. So your property taxes, you can find this information on Zillow. You can find it at the local property county recorder's office. So if you just look up the property, you should be able to find this information. So I'm going to plug in about $200 a month for the property taxes. Utilities, this is going to be for your gas, electric, water. So that can generally run about $150 to $300 a month. Insurance, this is for your actual property insurance while you hold the property. That can be about $100 to $150 a month. Homeowners association dues, this property is not in a homeowners association neighborhood, so we can actually just leave that blank. And then maintenance is going to be for generally for mowing, but maybe if you're doing something in the wintertime, it could be for snow removal or something like that. But if we get our property mowed maybe twice a month, we'll just plug in about $100 for the lawn mowing for the property. The next section is going to be your selling costs. So these are the costs that you have to pay when you sell the property. So the biggest expense is going to be your seller's agent's commissions. So generally, as a seller of real estate, you're going to have to pay for the buyer's agent commission, and you're going to have to pay for the seller's agent commission, which are generally about 3% each. So overall, you're going to pay 6% of the after repair value. So 6% of whatever that sales price is going to be. And then you'll also have other costs, costs for home warranties. So generally, I will include a home warranty with the sale of the property. So this will help ensure if any kind of equipment goes bad. So if a furnace goes out, if a hot water heater goes out, or if maybe a refrigerator for some reason breaks down, this will provide a warranty on the equipment of the property. So generally I'll provide that. Title insurance, this is going to be for title work to ensure that you're providing title to the end buyer. So I'll just plug in about $500 there as well. So selling costs are generally going to be about 7 to 10% of your after repair value. So we're floating around 6 to 7% right now, which I feel pretty comfortable with. Next, you can set up your financing costs. So you'll see there's a little setup tab next to the financing cost section. This is where you can set up your loans. So if you are going to be an all cash investor, you actually don't even need to set this up. You can just skip this step. But if you are going to be receiving outside funding from a private money lender or a hard money lender or a bank or maybe even a business partner, this is where you can set that information up. So basically, real quick, you've got all of your different loan options over here. These are pre-calculated based upon the amounts on the rehab analyzer. So you could get a loan for your purchase price, you could get a loan for your purchase and repairs, you could get a loan for all project costs or the after repair value. So again, those values are all being calculated over here on the rehab analyzer and pulling from this tool. We've got a drop down menu so you can select which option you want to use. So some lenders will lend for just the purchase price, some will lend for the purchase and repairs, some will lend for a percentage of the after repair value. So you really need to get in touch with your lender and figure out what their lending requirements are and then plug those in. Our lender in this scenario, they'll lend for the purchase and repairs amount. So right now we've got a purchase and repairs value of $141,000 here. And they generally lend at about 80% of that amount. So you can see our initial value was $141,000, but basically we're going to have to come up with 20% of that $141,000. So the lender is only going to really be providing us with $112,000. So we've got to come up with 20%, which is $28,000 here. So our loan balance that we're actually going to receive from the lender is going to be about $112,000. And then we're going to pay 6 months worth of financing costs, and our interest rate is going to be about 12%, which does seem expensive, but that's pretty typical for a hard money lender. And then you might pay 2 to 5% up front for points, which are just points and fees that you have to pay to the lender to originate the loan. So now that we've got that set up, our total financing costs are being calculated over here at the bottom, which is your buying costs, holding costs, selling costs, and financing costs added together. So our total financing costs, or our total fixed costs, are $25,674, which is roughly about 14% of the after repair value. So generally speaking, investors use a rule called the 70% rule, which allocates about 15% for your fixed costs and 15% for your profit. So we're pretty close to 15% of the after repair value here. So I feel pretty comfortable with where we're at since we're at about 14% of the ARV with our fixed costs. So generally I would say for your fixed costs, you need to be anywhere from 10 to 17% of the ARV would probably be the range there. Next, you can look at your repair costs. So we do have a detailed repair cost estimator over here. This is pre-built with 24 scopes of work. Each of those scopes of work are pre-built with unit prices, so you can basically just plug in your quantities here. It'll multiply the quantity by the unit price to give you a rough budget for that scope of work. So this can be used to create a detailed scope of work for your project in a detailed estimate. Once you start to plug in those values, it will actually feed over to this section over here. In this scenario, we actually haven't walked the property yet. We've basically just driven by the outside. We're assuming that we're probably going to need to gut the property and do a remodel of the kitchens, bathrooms, all new finishes throughout. And based upon our experience, we're generally at about $30 to $40 a square foot. So we are actually not going to use the detailed estimate, but we've got a couple other options for you. So you could do quick bid. Quick bid will essentially just let you throw in some quick numbers here for each of these scopes of work. So if you just had some rough ideas of what the scopes are going to be, you could do that here. Otherwise, you could do a lump sum, and lump sum basically just allows you to input a lump sum number directly into this cell. So based upon our experience, $35 to $40 a square foot for an extensive remodel. This is about a 1,500 square foot property. So I'm just going to do a formula in here real quick. 1,500 square feet times, let's go 35, and that's going to put us at about $52,000 for our budget. So based upon our experience, we think that $52,000 or $35 a square foot would really have us covered. But you need to really know your numbers in order to use cost per square foot values. Don't just plug in a cost per square foot based upon what I've told you here today. Make sure that you're really doing a detailed analysis of everything that needs to go into the project. Once you get comfortable estimating costs, have some projects under your belt, you'll be able to get a better idea of where these projects need to come in at from a lump sum perspective or a dollar per square foot perspective. So generally I'd recommend go through a detailed estimate if you can. That way you're actually doing the estimate, thinking about all the scope of work items on the project. But if you just don't have time, you can use a cost per square foot or a lump sum number, but just make sure that you know what you're doing when you're using those values. Next is the adders, which is going to be where you can modify your costs by your location. You can add in building permits, contractors overhead and profit, and contingency. So the location modifiers, this is what you could use if you did an estimate using the detailed repair cost estimator. So the detailed repair estimator utilizes national cost averages, but if you're going to be in a more expensive market like New York, Boston, you can see that those are about 35% to 25% more expensive than the national average. Or maybe if you're going to be in San Francisco, you can see that's about 40 to 35% more expensive than the national average. You'll want to modify those prices. So you'll want to include a factor there to account for your additional costs that you're going to incur by being in a more expensive market. So if you're in San Francisco, I've plugged in 1.455 here as the multiplier. So you can see that added $23,000 to our budget. So the same exact project in Kansas City or a national average town, this project in San Francisco would cost potentially $23,000 more dollars. So you need to make sure that if you are going to be in one of those more expensive markets, just take a look at this location modifiers tab here and review these multipliers to see where your market is at, and then adjust these costs as necessary. But of course, it's always best if you are going to be using that repair estimator, call around to your local subcontractors, get in touch with them, then just plug in your real unit prices here, so that way you don't even have to use that location multiplier. Just customize this for your specific market, and you won't even need to use that location multiplier. Building permit costs, so this is going to be for building permit expenses. So generally, if you are going to be doing a just finishes on a property, maybe it's just paint, carpet, you won't need a building permit. But if you're really going to be modifying the electrical, modifying the plumbing, HVAC, doing any kind of structural repairs to the property, building a deck, that's when you probably need to account for a building permit. But the best way to figure that out is to look up your local building codes, go to your local building codes website. They'll have permit fees. They'll tell you when you might need a building permit or not, and then you can just plug in that percentage directly into the cell. But generally it's about 1 to 2% of the repair costs, which is typically about 500 to $1,000. So we've got 1% currently plugged in for the building permit. And then contractors overhead and profit. So this is what you'll pay to a contractor if you hire a general contractor to manage your project. So the costs and the repair cost estimator, these are costs that are assuming that you're managing the project yourself. So these are just strictly subcontracted out costs, and they don't have a general contractor managing the project. So if you are going to be hiring out a general contractor to manage your subcontractors, schedule the project, and just manage the overall construction of the project, then that's when you need to really include about 10 to 15% on top of your repair cost estimate to account for compensating your contractor to manage the project. And then finally, contingencies. So this is going to be used to cover any kind of unforeseen issues on the project. So maybe you missed something in your estimate. Maybe there's something in a wall that you weren't anticipating. Maybe there's a structural repair on the property that you hadn't anticipated. That's what this contingency is really for, is to cover any kind of budget overages that might arise from unforeseen issues on the project. So generally, since we haven't looked at the property, it's one of those situations where you should probably include more contingency. Once you've kind of figured out the scope of work and feel comfortable with the scope, you might be able to reduce that contingency down. But I would say 5 to 10% is pretty typical. If you do not feel comfortable with the scope of work, haven't walked the property, maybe you're uncomfortable with estimating or don't have a lot of construction experience or flipping experience, this is really something where you should get real contractors involved, get real pricing for contractors and subcontractors. Otherwise, I mean, you could be including 25 up to 50% in your estimate, which just really isn't going to be that accurate. So if you aren't comfortable with estimating costs, then you really need to be getting in touch with your contractors and subcontractors to get those real values from them to help minimize some of that risk so you don't have to carry such a large contingency in your budgets. So again, 5 to 10% would probably be pretty reasonable. Anything above that, just make sure you're getting in touch with your contractors because they'll be able to help you out and eliminate some of that contingency. And then finally, the final step is to evaluate your profit. So how much profit do you want to make on the project? So right now we've got it pre-plugged in as a formula at 15% of the after repair value, which is pretty typical. Generally investors will shoot for 15 to 20% of the resale value. So that's what we've currently got it defaulted as. But maybe you're an investor that just looks for a minimum. So maybe you're like, I just want to make $20,000 on this project. So you just plug in 20,000 and you'll be happy with that value because that's how much you want to make on the deal. So you could just do a lump sum number if you want to do it that way, or if you do want to type in your own formula, you could say 15% times the after repair value. So now you're at 15% of the ARV. So right now our calculated maximum purchase price for this property is only $67,000. So if you recall, the seller was asking $110,000. So currently, based upon our current analysis of this deal, we think that their asking price is pretty overpriced and overvalued. So in this scenario, it's one of those situations where you could go ahead and submit an offer where you're at, see if they accept it. As competitive as it is out there, it's probably not likely that they're going to accept this offer, but I've had offers accepted when I'm $40,000 to $50,000 lower than their asking price. They sat on the offer for a few months and then came back to me and said, fine, we'll accept your offer that you offered. So you just never know. We're currently quite a bit lower than their asking price, but these are the numbers that went into the deal, and the numbers don't lie. So if you want to start fudging some numbers, then you start to get a little bit riskier. So maybe you could say that you're at maybe what if you sold it for 195? Well, then you could offer a little bit more for the property. What if you only took $20,000 in profit? then now you're at 83,000. So you can start to fudge the numbers, but generally speaking, I wouldn't advise you do that because that just starts to add risk to the project for you. So generally, if you can, stick to your guns, stick to your numbers, make the offer at what your initial offer was at, and you'll have more successful projects under your belt. So currently, if we go back to our previous numbers here, so we were at, I think it was about $67,000 was our offer price. So we're at about 71% of the ARV. So again, there's a rule called the 70% rule. This is a rule that investors use as a quick rule of thumb to analyze deals. So basically what it says is they want to buy the property at 70% of the after repair value. That 70% basically includes a cushion of 30% for your fixed costs and your rehab profit. So basically 15% for your fixed costs, 15% for your profit. So we are roughly at 70% currently where we're at, because we're at 13.9% for our fixed costs and 15% for our rehab profit. So we've got about 28.9% in those costs there. So we're pretty close to the 70% rule. Again, that's just a rule of thumb, so you could very well easily be at 75%, you could be at 80%. So some markets are different than others, and you're going to have to be a little bit more aggressive in certain markets. So but currently in our market, we like to be at about 75%. So maybe we could be a little bit more aggressive on our offer. Maybe we could decrease our profit here to get us up to 75%. And so right now, I bet $75,000 is about as high as I would want to go on an offer for this property. So that's a quick way, quick overview of how you can use the Rehab Analyzer tool to analyze a deal. You can see we've got some quick features in here that can help you do it a little bit quicker than going through an entire detailed analysis of all of your repair costs. But this is really going to be a good tool to help you do your due diligence on your projects, to really determine what you should offer for a property, to make sure that you're not overpaying for the property, and that way you're maximizing your profit on your deals. If you have any questions at all about the Rehab Analyzer or analyzing a deal, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. Thanks.